Last video, I left you with a promise. A man who looked at a map of the world and said something that got him laughed out of science. The continents move. This is him, Alfred Wegener. And here's the thing. He was right about one of the biggest ideas in the entire history of this planet. He was completely right. And they mocked him for it until the day he died, alone on a sheet of ice, still trying to prove it. The worst part isn't that they didn't believe him. It's that they finally admitted he was right, about 30 years too late to tell him. Wegener is staring at a world map, and he cannot unsee something. South America and Africa. Look at the coastlines. The bulge of Brazil fits into the dip under West Africa like two torn halves of the same page. Most people glance at that, think, weird, and move on. Wegener couldn't let it go. What if they used to be joined? What if every continent was once one single giant landmass that broke apart and drifted? He even gave it a name, Pangaea. One world cracked into pieces, and the pieces still slowly drifting apart. It sounds obvious now. In 1912, it sounded like madness. And here's what people miss. Wegener wasn't just vibing off the shape of a map. He went and stacked up evidence from sciences that had no business agreeing with each other. Identical fossils, the same extinct reptiles, the same ancient ferns, turning up on continents now separated by entire oceans. Ask yourself, how does a land reptile swim the Atlantic? Matching rock formations that lined up across the ocean like a torn newspaper headline. Scars gouged by ancient glaciers in places that are tropical today. And coal, which forms in warm swamps, buried in places that are now frozen solid. Every single clue pointed the same direction. These lands have moved. He laid it all out in 1912, published the full case in 1915. And the scientific world's response was, basically, how dare you? So why the rage? Because Wegener had one fatal hole in his story, and he knew it. He could show that the continents had moved. He could not explain how. What force could possibly shove an entire continent across the surface of the Earth? His best guesses, the spin of the planet, the pull of the tides, were real forces. But when other scientists ran the numbers, they came back thousands of times too weak. Not a little off, orders of magnitude off. And that handed his enemies exactly the opening they wanted. If you can't explain the how, they said, you don't have a theory. You have a fairy tale. And if that setup sounds familiar, it should. Remember the last man I told you about? Semmelweis. Proved washing your hands saved lives, but couldn't explain the germ underneath it. And it destroyed him. Wegener made the exact same mistake, just on a planetary scale. And the establishment did not hold back. Part of it was personal. Wegener wasn't even a geologist. He was a meteorologist, a weather guy walking into their field and rewriting the ground under their feet. They hated that. German geologists called his idea delirious ravings. One critic diagnosed him with, and I'm quoting a real phrase here, wandering pole plague. There was leftover bitterness against Germany after the war pouring gasoline on it. And in 1926, a group of America's top geologists held an entire conference for the specific purpose of dismantling his theory in public. Sit with that. A room full of experts, organizing as a group to bury one man's idea. And they won. By 1930, Continental drift was a punchline. Now it'd be easy to picture Wegener as some fragile dreamer, crushed by mean scientists. He was not. This man was iron. He was one of the toughest polar explorers alive on Earth. He had crossed the Greenland ice cap on foot, 750 miles of frozen nothing, and lived. He'd survived a glacier carving out from under him. He once set a world record for time aloft in a balloon. The guy who said the continent's drift wasn't hiding in a cozy library. He was out on the most lethal terrain on the planet, collecting data with his own frostbitten hands, because that is exactly who he was. Which is what makes his very last decision land like a punch. His final Greenland expedition. 2 of his researchers are camped deep in the interior, a station they called Eismitte, mid-ice, and they're running dangerously low on food and fuel with the winter closing in. Wegener will not let the mission fail, so at 50 years old, he loads up dog sleds and sets out across the ice to reach them. And he makes it. He gets his men their supplies. And then he turns back toward the coast, and he never arrives. Somewhere out on that white nothing, the cold and the effort were finally too much, and his heart gave out. His companion buried him in the snow, marked the grave, and pushed on alone. They found him months later, still exactly where they'd left him. He never came home. Greenland kept him for decades after he died. His idea stayed buried with him. And then, the 1950s, the 1960s, the evidence finally started arriving from the one place nobody had ever been able to look, the bottom of the ocean. And here's the irony that should genuinely make your jaw drop. The tools that finally proved Wegener right came from war. Magnetometers built to hunt enemy submarines. Seismometers built to detect nuclear bomb tests. Scientists used them to map the seafloor and discovered it was spreading, splitting open down the middle and pushing the continents apart. There it was, the mechanism. The one thing he could never find. The continents move. He had been right about all of it. We just had to invent the machines to see it. 30 years after we let him die, believing he'd failed. So that's 2 for 2 now on this channel. A man who could see the truth, prove the truth, stack up the evidence for the truth, and get destroyed anyway. Because being right was never the whole job. You need the mechanism. And you need someone willing to believe you while you're still alive to hear it. Wegener got a whole planet's worth of vindication in the end. He got it standing over an empty grave on the ice. Wegener spent 20 years and his life trying to prove he was right, and still couldn't close the case. Next time, I want to flip it completely. A man who was totally right about something that is very probably sitting in your kitchen right now, and who had absolutely no idea, no theory, no 20-year fight. Just a guy standing in front of a machine built to win a war, when the candy bar in his pocket quietly started to melt. He had no clue that the same invisible beam warming his snack could cook a person. So he did the only sensible thing. He went and found an egg. That's next on Almost Worked.